In the dark tapestry of the Imperium of Man, woven from threads of faith, fear, and unending war, one symbol shines with an insistent, almost unnatural light. The azure gleam of power armor, the stern classical features of a marble statue, the inverted omega, a promise of both an end and a beginning. This is the sigil of the Ultramarines, the 13th Legion, the sons of Roboute Guilliman. They are the public face of the Adeptus Astartes. They are the template. When a citizen of the Imperium thinks of a space marine, it is the image of an ultramarine they see. They are the heroes immortalized in stained glass pictograms within countless cathedrals. They are the saviors whose arrival on a war-torn world is chronicled in legends passed down through generations. On a million planets, children play with carved wooden figures of blue-armored warriors fighting back the darkness. They are the standard against which all other chapters are measured. They are the architects of victory, the builders of empires, the very embodiment of the Emperor's will. Their worlds, the 500 worlds of Ultramar, are not the decaying Gothic nightmares that define so much of the Imperium. They are oases of order, efficiency, and prosperity. Macragge, their fortress home, is a world of pristine white marble, of triumphant arches of academies and forums, a monument not just to war, but to civilization. This perfection is their greatest weapon, and it is their most profound deception. At the heart of the Ultramarines' philosophy, at the core of their being, lies a single text. It is not the Imperial Creed. It is not the fragmented whispers of the Emperor's divinity. It is the Codex Astartes. Penned by their own Primarch, this tome is more than a guide to military strategy. It is a scripture. It is a dogma. For 10,000 years, the Ultramarines have worshipped this book. They have studied its passages, debated its nuances, and applied its doctrines with a fanaticism that would make an ecclesiarch proud. They believe with absolute conviction that the Codex holds the answer to every conceivable threat. That logic, strategy, and superior organization are the ultimate tools of salvation. But in the blood-soaked, faith-driven galaxy of the 41st millennium, this very belief is the first seed of heresy. We are taught to think of heresy in stark, simple terms. The rusted sigil of the plague god, the sensual whispers of the Prince of Pleasure, the bloody rune of the Skull Lord, the shifting sigil of the Architect of Fate. We see heresy as the 8-pointed star carved into flesh, the chanting of a dark ritual, the bargain struck with a demon. These are the obvious sins, the loud screaming blasphemies that the Inquisition hunts and burns. But there are other heresies, subtler, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. What is heresy? Heresy is the sin of pride. It is the hubris of believing that your own reason surpasses the divine will of the Emperor. It is the arrogance of looking upon the crumbling, dogmatic, superstitious Imperium and thinking I can build something better. Heresy is the ambition that places political power above spiritual unity. It is the cold, calculated decision to defy the High Lords, to ignore the established chain of command, to break faith with your brothers, all in the name of a greater good that you have defined. Heresy is the simple, devastating thought, I know better. This is the heresy of the Ultramarines. What happens when perfection is not a virtue, but a shield? What happens when the brightest, most celebrated sons of the Imperium use their reputation as a cloak to hide 10,000 years of political ambition, profound arrogance, and philosophical defiance? What happens when the saviors of the Imperium believe in their hearts that they know better than the Emperor himself? We will strip away the polished blue Ceramite. We will look past the victory laurels and the marble monuments. We will delve into the shadows cast by the brightest light in the Imperium. We will not hunt for demons or secret covens. We will search for something far more terrifying, the heresy of the will. We will uncover the hidden heresies of the Ultramarines. To understand the Legion, we must first understand the Father, the Primarchs, the 20 demigods created by the Master of mankind. They were not just sons. They were instruments, each engineered for a singular purpose, each a facet of the Emperor's own impossible genius. and each profoundly flawed. There was the rage of Angron, a shattered instrument of pure, indiscriminate fury. There was the grim endurance of Mortarion, steeped in bitterness and spite. There was the cold, calculating terror of Conrad Kurz, the secretive, primal chivalry of the Lion, the unshakable, unquestioning loyalty of Rogal Dorn, who was not a man, but a living fortress. They were beings of mythic absolutes, forged for a single, terrible purpose: conquest. And then there was Roboute Guilliman. While his brothers were storms of blood and fire, Guilliman was a different force entirely. He was the statesman, the logician, the administrator. While his brothers conquered worlds, Guilliman governed them. His great project, even before the Emperor found him, was the consolidation of his home system of Macragge into a shining beacon of civilization. He was not a berserker, nor a paranoid knight, nor a stoic executioner. He was first and foremost a builder of empires. This is the origin of the flaw. Guilliman was the rational son. He was the pragmatic one. In a galaxy that screams for blind fanaticism, in a holy war that demands the suspension of all reason in favor of absolute burning faith, pragmatic is the most dangerous word a man can utter. It implies that the Emperor's will is subject to analysis. It implies that a holy crusade can be reduced to supply lines, tax codes, and administrative flowcharts. Where a zealot like Leman Russ saw only the glorious melee, Guilliman saw the logistics of ammunition resupply. Where Rogal Dorn saw an unbreakable wall of faith, Guilliman saw stress tolerances and kill zones. He did not simply wage war, he managed it. He believed that the Great Crusade was not just a spiritual reclamation, but a project of systems. He believed that the Imperium could be perfected not through faith, but through order. His mind was a forum, not an altar. This practicality was not a personal quirk. It was a philosophy. It was the imperial truth. The Emperor's grand design was a secular one. He sought to liberate humanity from the shackles of superstition, to kill the phantom gods that lurked in the warp, and to build an empire based on reason, science, and human supremacy. Of all the Primarchs, Guilliman was perhaps the most devout student of this truth. He did not just fight for it, he internalized it. He believed in a universe governed by logic, not by dark gods, or for that matter, a divine one. This is the primordial heresy. The Imperium that Guilliman was born to build is not the Imperium that now exists. The Emperor's project failed. The imperial truth died on the fields of terror, and the Emperor himself, in his agonizing undeath, became the very thing he despised, the God Emperor of mankind. The modern Imperium is a monolithic, suffocating theocracy. It runs on the chanted prayers of the ecclesiarchy, the ritual sacrifices of the faithful, and the unthinking, burning fanaticism of its subjects. To deny the divinity of the Emperor is the highest of all possible treasons. And Roboute Guilliman, the father of the Ultramarines, was in his very soul a denier. He passed this legacy on. His sons are not the sons of a fiery zealot. They are the sons of a philosopher king, an accountant general. He did not give them a book of prayers. He gave them the Codex Astartes, a book of systems. He taught them to think, to analyze, and to value a sound strategy over a blind charge. He gave them the most dangerous gift of all the heresy of reason. The galaxy burned. The Horus heresy was not a war. It was an inferno of betrayal that consumed reality itself. The grandest vision in human history was being torn apart by its most trusted son. And as the War Master's fleets plunged towards Terra, the very fabric of the cosmos was torn open by the traitor legions. They called it the Ruin Storm, a tidal wave of psychic filth and raw immaterium orchestrated by the word-bearers that drowned the galaxy. It was a strategic masterstroke of unthinkable malice. Communication ceased. Astropathic choirs screamed as their minds were simultaneously incinerated and devoured. Navigation through the warp became impossible, a suicidal lottery. The Imperium was shattered into 1,000 isolated islands of terror, each one believing it was the last survivor. In the heart of Ultramar, Roboute Guilliman stood upon the precipice of this new, terrible reality. His 500 worlds were cut off. His legion, the largest and most powerful of all, was blinded. And then the ultimate blow, the light of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of the Emperor himself, guttered and died, choked off by the storm. To the pragmatic mind of the Primarch of the Ultramarines, the conclusion was inescapable. Terra had fallen. The War Master had won. The Emperor was dead. The duty of a loyal son was clear: to launch a desperate suicidal crusade towards the throne world. To gather every ship, every warrior, and hurl them into the teeth of the ruin storm, to die in the shadow of the Imperial Palace, avenging their father or dying in the attempt. That is what Rogal Dorn would do. It is what the Wolf King Leman Russ would do. It is what faith demanded. But Roboute Guilliman did not despair. He did not give in to rage. He did what he had always done. He organized, he planned, he built. He saw a desperate charge to Terra for what his logic deemed it a pointless waste of resources, a futile gesture of emotion. He saw the largest remaining bastion of Imperial strength, his own Ultramar, and he made a decision. If the Imperium was dead, he would birth a new one. And so, in the isolated heart of his own domain, protected by his own fleets and ruled by his own laws, Roboute Guilliman committed the ultimate act of political heresy. He declared the foundation of Imperium Secundus, the Second Empire. This was no mere defensive pact. This was not a temporary military alliance. It was a new government in open defiance of the old. It was a formal declaration that the Emperor's project had failed and that he, Guilliman, would be the one to replace it. Macragga, not Terra, would be the new capital. In a move of calculated political genius, he did not claim the throne for himself. Such an act would be too close to Horus's own blatant ambition. Instead, he waited. And when fate delivered his brothers, the angelic Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and the dark, brooding Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels to his doorstep, he saw his opportunity. He named Sanguinius the Angel, the most beloved and noble of all Primarchs, as the new Emperor Regent. It was a masterful stroke. It gave his new empire a veneer of tragic legitimacy. It was not a power grab, it was a necessity. With the Lion as his grim Lord Protector and himself as Lord Commander, a new triumvirate was formed. A new throne, a new senate, a new hope. The apologists for the 13th Legion, writing in their pristine scriptoriums on Macragga, will argue that this was a noble act, a pragmatic necessity to preserve the light of civilization in a galaxy plunged into darkness. They will say he was holding the line, waiting for the day the storms cleared. This is a lie, or rather a truth so twisted it serves as one. Let us speak plainly. This was usurpation. At the very moment the Emperor betrayed and besieged needed his sons, most Roboute Guilliman turned his back on Terra and declared his father's life's work null and void. He did not just assume his father was dead. He legislated it. He built a new throne, placed a new emperor upon it, and began the process of rerouting the Imperium's hopes, its resources, and its loyalties to himself. This was the ultimate expression of the Ultramarines' arrogance. The belief that the Imperium was not a holy covenant bound by an oath to a single master, but a system that could be rebooted. It was the belief that he, Roboute Guilliman, had the right to decide when the game was lost and when to start a new one. The Emperor's grand design was a unified humanity, ruled from Terra, bound by a single will. Guilliman, in one audacious, organized, and perfectly logical act, shattered that vision. He created a rival power. A shelter, yes, but also a challenge. He had judged the Imperium and its master and found them wanting. He placed his own logic, his own talent for administration, and his own vision for an orderly humanity above his simple sacred oath to his father. He believed he knew better. And in that single arrogant thought, the first and greatest heresy of the Ultramarines was born. An empire cannot be born in secret. Imperium Secundus may have been isolated from Terra, but it could not hide from the Primarchs themselves. And when the fleet of the Lion L. Johnson tore reality asunder and arrived at Macragga, it was not a reunion of brothers. It was an indictment. The Dark Angel's fleet did not arrive bearing flags of peace. They arrived with void shields flared and torpedo tubes open. Lionel Johnson was the Emperor's first son, the executioner, the hunter of monsters in the deep night. He was loyalty made manifest, uncompromising and absolute. He did not see a logical safe haven. He saw a usurper's throne. The legendary confrontation that followed was not one of bolters, but of wills waged in the marble halls of Macragge. There, two philosophies of loyalty collided. The lion cloaked in his black armor was a spectre of judgment. To him, reason was a luxury. Only the oath mattered. He looked at Guilliman, the administrator, the ruler, and he saw a reflection of Horus. "What have you done?" The lion's voice was not a question. It was a sentence. "You have built a monument to your own arrogance while our father is dying. You have crowned a pretender." Guilliman, in his polished azure plate, countered with logic, with reason, with necessity. He spoke of preserving the Emperor's dream, not letting it die with him. He spoke of creating a fortress from which humanity could regroup. "I am saving the Imperium," Guilliman declared, "not burying it in the ashes of blind faith." The lion drew his blade. The act was almost instantaneous. To him, there was no distinction between Guilliman's act and the War Master's betrayal. Both believed they knew better than the Emperor. Both decided the future of mankind should be in their hands. Both had forged their own thrones. The only truth, the lion snarled, is obedience. All else is self-deception. And you have deluded yourself into treason. Ultramar itself nearly became the battleground for a new civil war, a war between loyalists. The fleets hung in orbit, their weapons locked onto one another. The Dark Angels were prepared to purge their own brothers, the Ultramarines. It was only the intervention of Sanguinius, the reluctant emperor, who physically placed himself between his brothers, that stayed the unthinkable bloodshed. This tense blade-edge standoff exposed the truth. Even to other loyal Primarchs, Guilliman's actions were not a noble necessity. They were a violation of an oath, a heresy of the will. And then Imperium Secundus collapsed, not from an external invasion, but from a single internal truth. A whisper. A single desperate flickering astropathic signal, piercing the ruin storm like a needle of light. An image, the eternity gate of the Imperial Palace. The screams of Rogel Dawn, and above it all the psychic light of the Emperor, not extinguished, not dead, but burning in a final defensive fury. Terror still stood. The Emperor still lived. In one singular moment, Roboute Guilliman's entire logical construct, his entire grand enterprise was laid bare. It was not just a mistake, it was a catastrophic failure of faith. His pragmatic assumption that the Emperor was dead, the sole justification for his actions, was wrong. The Emperor had fought, the Emperor had endured, and while he endured, his perfect son had been busy building a replacement empire. Imperium Secundus was dissolved instantly. Its false necessity evaporated. Oaths of loyalty were hastily re-sworn. The three Primarchs and their legions now began a desperate, tragically late race to terror. They would never make it in time. They would arrive to find a shattered throne and a dying god. But the stain remained. Guilliman had dismantled his heretical kingdom, but he could not erase the fact that he had built it. He had proven something terrifying to the universe, that the loyalty of the Ultramarines was conditional. This is the hidden legacy of Imperium Secundus. It established a precedent that would echo for 10,000 years. It planted a dangerous idea in the heart of the 13th Legion that they were protectors not of the person of the Emperor, but of the idea of the Imperium. And if the Imperium itself became corrupt or irrational or inefficient, if Terra issued orders that Guilliman or his successors deemed unsound, they had the right, the duty to act independently. They would follow their own logic. They would follow a greater good of their own definition. Imperium Secundus never truly died. It simply shrank, becoming a hidden philosophy, a dormant arrogance in the heart of Ultramar, waiting for the right moment to rise again. In the grim aftermath of the Siege of Terra, the Imperium was a smoking ruin. The traitor legions, broken but not defeated, fled to the Eye of Terror, leaving a trail of shattered worlds in their wake. The Great Scouring began a crusade of vengeance led by the remaining loyalists. And at the forefront, naturally, were the Ultramarines. Emerging from the shadow of their Imperium Secundus, they fought with a renewed, almost desperate fervor. They were eager to wash away the stain of their political ambition with the blood of traitors. They became the authors of the new Imperium, the writers of its history. And in the history they wrote, one myth was carved in stone, the myth of their own incorruptibility. The official histories penned by Ultramarine historians and sanctioned by the High Lords of Terror state that the 13th Legion was unique. The Blood Angels had their red thirst, the Space Wolves had the wolfen, the White Scars had their wildness, the Dark Angels had their secrets. But the Ultramarines, they were stable, they were perfect, their Geneseed was pure. The histories claim that of all the great legions, not one Ultramarine turned traitor during the heresy. This is the greatest and most insidious lie in the Legion's history. It is a calculated act of propaganda, a purging of memory so complete it borders on the heretical itself. The truth is far uglier. Perfection is a statistical impossibility even for the sons of Guilliman. In the fires of the heresy, when brother turned on brother, there were those in azure armor who fell. We know of them only in whispers in fragmented data files, sealed by inquisitorial decree. We speak of the Legion of the Damned, a phantasmal force of spectral space marines. Among their number are warriors clad in the unmistakable blue of the 13th, their armor wreathed in spectral fire, forever paying the price for a betrayal so deep it scarred their very souls. We speak of warsmith Honsu of the Iron Warriors, a half-breed, a despised mongrel among his own legion, but one whose lineage is tainted by the most noble of genestocks. He carries the seed of Guilliman within his corrupted flesh, a living blasphemy, a walking testament to the lie that Ultramar's blood cannot be corrupted. And then there are the officially recorded but quietly ignored elements. The Silver Skulls, a Successor Chapter, claim descent from the Iron Warriors, but their Geneseed is suspiciously stable, their traditions mirroring those of Ultramar. Is this a lie to cover a deeper truth? Or is it perhaps that Geneseed from the 13th was used to secretly rebuild a traitor legion's remnants? The lines blur. But the most damning evidence is not in those who fell, but in how the Ultramarines treated the failure. In the archives of Macraga there are no statues of these fallen sons. There are no cautionary tales. There are no records of their existence. They have been erased. This is the heresy of pride in its purest form. The other loyalist legions are defined by their tragedies. The Blood Angels are haunted by the Black Rage, a constant reminder of Sanguinius's sacrifice. The Dark Angels are locked in an eternal, desperate hunt for their fallen, a quest for redemption that defines their every action. These chapters are tempered by their flaws. They understand their own capacity for failure. The Ultramarines deny their failures. They refuse to acknowledge that the same potential for corruption that shattered 8 other legions exists within their own hearts. They scrubbed their records clean, presenting a flawless, unbroken image to the Imperium. They are the perfect son who refuses to admit he has ever sinned. This refusal is not strength. It is a terrifying weakness. To deny your capacity for darkness is to give that darkness power. By claiming they are incorruptible, the Ultramarines have blinded themselves. They have built their house upon the sand of their own arrogance, refusing to see the cracks in the foundation until the entire structure is poised to collapse. They have made a fetish of their own perfection, and in doing so, they have created the one lie that the ruinous powers can truly exploit. The Ultramarines' pride is not limited to their history or their political acumen. It is a biological imperative encoded into their very being, their gene seed. It is lauded as the most stable, the purest, the most resilient of all the Primarch lines. It is the solid foundation upon which an unprecedented number of successor chapters have been built. It is the genetic blueprint for perfection. But in the 41st millennium, perfection is a synonym for stagnation, and stagnation is a form of death. The Geneseed of Guilliman does not carry a curse of mutation like that of Sanguinius or Russ. It carries a far more subtle affliction, the curse of arrogance, of unyielding, fatal rigidity. To see this curse made manifest, we need only look to the grim guardians of the Eastern Fringe. We look to the Scythes of the Emperor. They were a second founding chapter, born from the purest stock of the 13th Legion. They were in many ways more Ultramarine than the Ultramarines themselves. Their chapter master, Obadiah, was a student of the Codex, so devout he was said to have memorized all 888 cantos of strategy. Their homeworld Sotha was a fortress of order on the very edge of uncharted space. They were the perfect sons, dutiful stoic, and utterly unbreakably loyal to the text. And then from the black intergalactic void came something the Codex had never predicted. Hive Fleet Behemoth, the Great Devourer, the Tyranids. The Scythes of the Emperor did not panic. They prepared. They drew up battle plans based on the sacred tactical dispositions of the Codex. They established defensive perimeters. They arrayed their squads in perfect kill zones, their devastators on the high ground, their tactical marines holding the line, their assault marines ready for the countercharge. They followed the book to the letter. The problem was that the Tyranids had not read the book. The bio-horrors of the hive mind did not operate on logic. They did not value objectives or fear strong points. They came as a singular, overwhelming biological tide. Where the Scythes prepared for a frontal assault, the Tyranids sent burrowing organisms to erupt from beneath their fortresses. Where the Scythes held a perfect defensive line, the Tyranids dropped mycetic spores from orbit, landing 1 billion ravenous creatures directly inside their perimeter. The Scythes' tactics, so perfect for fighting a legion war or a greenskin war, were utterly useless. Their rigidity became their doom. Their commanders, even as their command centers were being dissolved into bioacid, were reported to be consulting the Codex, desperately seeking a tactical solution that did not exist. They could not adapt. They would not adapt. To do so would be to admit the Codex was flawed, and to them that was a greater sin than extinction. The fall of Sotha was a massacre. The fortress monastery was breached, its sacred halls filled with the screams of the dying and the chittering of the swarm. The chapter was annihilated, its Geneseed vaults plundered, its world left a barren, digested rock. A handful of survivors, led by a single traumatized sergeant, escaped to carry the tale. The Scythes of the Emperor, a proud chapter of 1,000 warriors, were reduced to a broken company of ghosts. This was more than a military defeat. It was a theological one. This is the heresy of rigidity. What is the ultimate purpose of a space marine? To protect the Imperium, to survive so that he may fight again. The Scythes of the Emperor failed in this most fundamental duty. They chose ideological purity over victory. They marched proudly to their own extinction, clutching the Codex Astartes to their chests like a suicide pact. They died because they were too arrogant to change. They believed that the word of their Primarch, written 10,000 years prior, was more important than the reality of the war in front of them. This is the true curse of Guilliman's Geneseed. It is an inflexibility of the soul, a dogmatic pride that values the theory of warfare above the act of survival. The Scythes were not just killed by Tyranids, they were killed by the Codex Astartes. If the Scythes of the Emperor demonstrate the fatal flaw of rigidity, the other side of Guilliman's genetic curse is a pride so profound it will seek any means to achieve the perfection it craves. If the Codex is not enough, this pride will look elsewhere beyond the realm of logic and into the forbidden darkness. For this we turn to the Silver Skulls, another proud successor chapter of the Ultramarines. The Silver Skulls share their parent legion's obsession with flawless execution. Their battle record is pristine. Their victories are models of efficiency. They are renowned for their uncanny ability to anticipate an enemy's every move, to be in the perfect position to strike the killing blow at the precise ordained moment. They do not just win, they win perfectly. But this perfection does not come from the Codex Astartes, it comes from prophecy. The chapter is dominated by its librarians, a caste of psychers known as prognosticators. These are not the battlefield telepaths of other chapters. They are seers. They are oracle priests. The Silver Skulls do not go to war without consulting their visions. They believe they are guided by the Tarak Uten, which they interpret as the divine all-seeing will of the Emperor. They cast the bones, they read the entrails of sacrifices, they scree the smoky eddies of burning incense, and they divine the future. In this, they commit a terrible and profound heresy. In the Imperium of Man, there is a line thin as a razor's edge between the sanctioned use of psychic power and the damned art of sorcery. To use the warp as a weapon is sanctioned. To listen to the warp, to ask it for knowledge, to bargain with it for glimpses of the future. This is divination. This is the path of the sorcerer. There is no divine will in the immaterium. There is only a howling ocean of madness populated by demonic entities and the echoes of insatiable gods. The future is not a stable thing to be read, but a chaotic storm to be navigated. To see the future is to attract the attention of the things that live in that storm. The Silver Skulls, in their arrogance, believe they are interpreting the Emperor's will. What they are actually doing is reading the tarot cards of chaos. Their Tarak Uten is not the Emperor, it is the warp. And the warp always lies. This is the hidden cost of their perfection. Their flawless victories are not their own. They are bought with forbidden knowledge. They have traded the cold, hard logic of their Primarch for the seductive whispers of the soothsayer. They have abandoned the proven steel of the Codex for the shifting, unreliable promises of sorcery. This is a heresy of faith, a rejection of imperial doctrine in favor of a shortcut. And the Imperium knows. The Silver Skulls are a successful chapter, but they are not a trusted one. They operate under a permanent shadow of suspicion. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, the Daemon Hunters, are permanently attached to their fleets. Every victory is scrutinized. Every perfect battle plan is analyzed for the taint of warpcraft. The Silver Skulls are forced to protest their loyalty, to cloak their heretical practices in elaborate rituals and endless protestations of faith to the Emperor. They are trapped by their own success. They are addicted to the prophecies that grant them victory, and in doing so, they have bound themselves to the very power they are sworn to destroy. This is the other curse of Guilliman's Geneseed, an obsession with perfection so total that when the logical codex fails, it will turn to the illogical, the forbidden, and the heretical, rather than accept the simple existence of a flaw. This insidious pride, this heresy of the will, is not confined to the distant past or the obscure practices of Successor Chapters. It beats in the very heart of the Ultramarines chapter itself in the modern 41st millennium. It beats in the twin hearts of its greatest living hero, Marneus Calgar, Lord of Macraga. The example is Damnos, a forge world rich in resources loyal to the Imperium. And one day, without warning, its crust cracked open. From stasis tombs buried for 60 million years, an ancient evil returned. The Necrons. Legions of immortal soulless machines rose from the dust, their gas flares stripping flesh from bone in silent, terrifying waves. The planet's fall was not a question of if, but when. The Cadian shock troopers stationed there fought and died with incredible bravery, but they were not fighting an army. They were fighting a geological inevitability. The Segmentum Command, the High Lords of the Adeptus Terra, reviewed the strategic situation. The Tyrannid splinter fleets were pressing from the east. Orc wargs were raging on a dozen fronts. The Eye of Terror was stirring. Damnos, while valuable, was one world. The resources required to save it against a major tomb world awakening were deemed too high. The order was given exterminatus, abandon the planet, deny its resources to the enemy, cede the system. This was a sound strategic decision, a painful but logical sacrifice for the greater good of the Imperium. But Damnos lay near the borders of Ultramar, and the Ultramarines had sworn to protect it. When the order to abandon the system reached Marneus Calgar, he read it, he acknowledged it, and he defied it. Calgar, the master of the Codex, the living embodiment of Guilliman's strategic genius, made a decision based not on logic, but on pure, unadulterated pride. He would not cede a world under his protection. He would not allow a blemish on his chapter's record of victory. He gathered the full might of the Ultramarines, looked upon the unwinnable war, and uttered the words that would define this heresy of arrogance. While a single Ultramarine breathes, Damnos will not fall. This was not courage. It was military insubordination. It was a sin of pride so profound it risked the very stability of the sector. Calgar was not just any chapter master. He was the Lord of Macragge, the de facto ruler of an entire subsector of space. His open defiance was not a minor infraction. It was a political crisis. He was in effect telling the High Lords of Terra and the entirety of the Imperial High Command that he knew better, that his chapter's honor was more important than the Imperium's grand strategy. The war for Damnos was a catastrophe. Calgar led his forces into a meat grinder. The Necrons were numberless, their technology superior, their leader the Undying, a being of godlike power. The Ultramarines paid for their chapter master's pride with rivers of their own blood. Calgar himself was struck down, his body broken, his limbs shorn from his torso, surviving only by the sheer, stubborn miracle of his Astartes physiology. He lost his hands, his legs, his eyes. He nearly lost everything. He won. A temporary victory bought at a ruinous price. He drove the Necrons back underground, but the planet was a charnel house. The resources he had fought to save were spent 100 times over in the lives of his irreplaceable First Company veterans and the assets of his chapter. This is the Ultramarine heresy in its modern form. It is the belief that Ultramar is inviolate, that an Ultramarine defeat is an impossibility, a concept so offensive that all strategic logic must be sacrificed to prevent it. Calgar did not defy the Imperium to save its people. He defied the Imperium to save his chapter's reputation. He wagered the lives of his men, the stability of his domain, and his own sacred oath of obedience to the High Lords, all for the sake of pride. He put his own blue-armored ego above the will of the Emperor, and in the grim calculus of the Imperium, there is no greater sin. For 10,000 years he was a monument to failure. Roboute Guilliman, the avenging son, the pragmatic genius, struck down not in a blaze of glory, but by the poisoned blade of his corrupted brother Fulgrim. For 10 millennia he sat enthroned in the Temple of Correction on Macragge, held in a single agonizing moment between life and death, by the most advanced stasis field in the Imperium. He was not a sleeping king. He was a relic, a wound that would not heal, the living, agonizing symbol of the Imperium's own slow decay. The Ultramarines in their pride guarded this failure as their most holy artifact. They, the masters of organization, the victors of 1,000 campaigns, could not save their own father. The greatest minds of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the most faithful priests of the Ministorum, all had tried. All had failed. Then came the end. The 41st millennium reached its nadir. Cardia, the fortress against chaos, had fallen. The galaxy itself was torn in two by the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. The light of the Astronomicon guttered. The Imperium was dying. Despair for the first time had truly breached the walls of pristine Macragge, and into this absolute despair an impossible blasphemous offer presented itself. They came not as invaders but as supplicants. Xenos, the Elder, the ancient, treacherous, and utterly damned enemy of mankind. They were a new faction, the Inari followers of a nascent god of the dead, and they were led by a witch. Yvraine, the emissary of Inead. She stood in the halls of Guilliman, surrounded by the greatest heroes of the Ultramarines, and made her claim. She could do what 10,000 years of imperial faith and science could not. She could heal him. She could resurrect him. Let us be clear on the theology. The imperial creed is absolute. Suffer not the Xenos to live. Abhor the witch, destroy the sorcerer. To even listen to such an offer was a sin. To entertain it was heresy. Maneus Calgar, the Lord of Macragge, the same man whose pride had defied the High Lords at Damnos, now stood at the precipice of the ultimate damnation. Before him was a choice to obey the most sacred laws of the Imperium and let his Primarch and perhaps the Imperium itself die, or to commit an act of treason so profound it would rewrite the definition of heresy. The Ultramarines, guided by the pragmatic prophecies of their chief librarian Tigurius, made their choice. They chose heresy. They stood aside. The guardians of the holiest shrine in Ultramar, the honor guard who would slaughter a regiment for tracking mud on the marble floors, formed a protective circle, not around their Primarch, but around the Xenos witch who had come to defile him. They opened the stasis field, an act forbidden for millennia. They allowed Ivrain, an alien, a psyker, a priestess of a Xenos god, to place her unclean hands upon the demigod son of the Emperor. This was not a miracle. It was a dark pact. It was a ritual of alien sorcery. The Inari did not perform an act of healing. They performed a transference using the power of their new dark god to reignite the soul of a Primarch. They used magic. To the rest of the Imperium, this is a sin beyond comprehension. While loyal soldiers of the Astra Militarum died in their billions on Cadia, their lips chanting prayers to the God Emperor, the Ultramarines were in their fortress sanctuary bargaining with aliens. While the Sisters of Battle burned heretics for consorting with the lesser Xenos, the Lord of Macragge was inviting the most powerful of Xenos witches into his inner sanctum. This is the ultimate expression of Ultramarine arrogance. They believed they had the right to make this choice. They believed that their judgment, their logic superseded the divine word of the Emperor himself. They put their loyalty to their own chapter, their own genetic father, above the soul of the Imperium. They did not just suffer the Xenos to live. They invited them in. They collaborated with them. They used their sorcery. They bound the fate of the Imperium to an alien plot for reasons they could not possibly understand. The resurrection of Roboute Guilliman was not the second coming. It was the Imperium's greatest act of treason committed by its most trusted sons. He awoke. Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch, the last son, returned to the galaxy. The act of Xenos sorcery was a success. He rose from his throne of 10,000 years, his body remade, his mind sharp. He was the hero returned, the savior from legend, the single shining hope in a galaxy consumed by darkness. And that hope died the moment he truly saw the Imperium he had been resurrected to save. His first breath as a living man in 10 millennia was not of triumph. It was of pure, undiluted horror. He awoke expecting to find the Imperium of his father, an empire of reason, of secular truth, of human potential. A bulwark against the darkness, yes, but one built on the foundations of logic and enlightenment. Instead, he awoke to a madhouse. He saw a galaxy defined by the very superstitions his father had died to destroy. He saw the inverted omega of his own legion, the sigil of rational thought twisted into a holy icon. He saw his own sons, the Ultramarines, kneeling in prayer. He heard the screaming, hysterical chants of a billion subjects who no longer fought for humanity or reason, but for a god emperor. When he arrived on Holy Terra, his horror turned to revulsion. The Imperial Palace, once a monument to the Emperor's secular vision, had become a single continent-spanning cathedral. The air was thick with the suffocating stench of incense, the wailing of pilgrims, the blood of ritual sacrifice. He saw the power of the ecclesiarchy, a monolithic, corrupt, and all-powerful church that Lorgar, his traitor brother, would have wept with joy to behold. And then he saw his father. He saw the golden throne. He saw the rotting skeletal corpse wired into a machine of unimaginable suffering, kept alive by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers. And he heard them call this pathetic dying relic a god. In that moment, Roboute Guilliman's shock solidified into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. This was not his father's Imperium. This was Lorgar's, and he would tear it down. He confronted the new masters of the Imperium, the High Lords, the Cardinals of the Ministorum, the Ecclesiarch himself, the High Priest of this new, mad faith who came to Guilliman expecting to bless a returned angel. Guilliman offered no such comfort. He looked upon the High Pontiff of the Imperial Creed and felt nothing but contempt. He did not see a holy man. He saw a cancer. He saw the living symbol of his father's ultimate failure. He spoke his voice not the booming cry of a savior, but the cold, cutting tone of an administrator who had found a catastrophic error in the ledgers. "He is not a god," Guilliman declared, the words echoing through the hallowed halls of the palace. "He was my father. He was a man, a great man. But he is not a god. And this nightmare of faith is not what he wanted." He began his work. As the newly declared Lord Commander of the Imperium, he did not just wage war against the arch-enemy. He waged a war against the Imperium's soul. He stripped the ecclesiarchy of its military power. He challenged their tithes. He openly scoffed at their miracles. He began to reinstitute the imperial truth, speaking of logic efficiency and secular compliance. The priests and cardinals were horrified. The high lords were terrified. The faithful were confused. They did not understand. In the Imperium of the 42nd millennium, there is only one true heresy. To worship chaos is to be a traitor, a foe. But to deny the divinity of the Emperor, this is the ultimate sin. This is the one blasphemy for which there is no forgiveness. It is the spiritual poison that the Ordo Hereticus exists to burn. It is the one crime greater than any other, the one thought that can unravel the very fabric of imperial society. And the man committing this ultimate unforgivable heresy was not a hidden cultist. He was not a demagogue on some backwater shrine world. He was the Lord Commander of the Imperium, the Regent of Terror, the last loyal Primarch, Roboute Guilliman the Saviour. The hope of humanity was, by the very laws of the nation he had returned, to lead the single greatest and most powerful heretic in the galaxy. He was the arch-heretic, and his Ultramarines were now his arch-inquisitors, the armed fist of his rational blasphemy. The resurrection of Roboute Guilliman was not a singular event. It was a dual heresy, a pact struck with two separate forbidden powers. The first was the Xenos Witch of Rain, who used her unholy sorcery to reignite his soul. The second, and perhaps the more insidious, was the monster he brought with him from the shadows of the past. He did not return alone. He brought an army, and he brought its creator Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cole. If Guilliman is the ultimate heretic of reason, Cole is the ultimate heretic of faith. He is an affront to the entire Adeptus Mechanicus. He is a man who has lived for 10,000 years, not through loyalty to the Omnissiah, but through the forbidden arts of biotransference, xenotech integration, and quite possibly the implementation of abominable intelligence. His mind is not one, but many a chorus of fragmented personalities, some of which may not even be human. He is a walking, blasphemous violation of the Mechanicus's most sacred creed, "Thou shalt not innovate." The cult of the machine believes all knowledge has already been discovered. The quest is to find holy standard template constructs, not to create new things. To invent is to presume to be greater than the Omnissiah, and Belisarius Cawl is the greatest inventor in 10 millennia. His ultimate sin, the project he toiled on for 10,000 years in the dark, was a commission from Guilliman himself just before the Primarch fell to Fulgrim. Cawl looked upon the Emperor's crowning achievement, the sacred form of the Adeptus Astartes, and he uttered the definitive technological blasphemy, "I can make this better." When Guilliman awoke, this arch-heretic was waiting, and he presented his life's work, the Primaris Space Marine. A new warrior, stronger, faster, more resilient. Cured, he claimed, of the genetic flaws that plagued legions like the Blood Angels and Space Wolves. A new generation of demigod created not by the Emperor, but by the tinkering, arrogant hands of Belisarius Cawl. And Roboute Guilliman the pragmatist, the man who saw only a tool to save his dying empire, did not hesitate. He did not order Cawl captured. He did not call for a holy conclave on Mars to debate the theological ramifications. He did not quarantine this new, untested, and unholy creation. He sanctioned it. As Lord Commander of the Imperium, he gave Cawl his full blessing. He accepted this new synthetic generation of warriors and made them the new standard. He gave this heretic, this monster of science, the authority to rewrite the genetic code of the Emperor's angels. He commanded that this new technology be disseminated to all chapters, that ancient and proud chapters submit their sacred Geneseed to Khal's profane upgrades, that his loyal sons cross the Rubicon, a process so dangerous it killed as many as it improved. To the orthodox dogmatic priests of Mars, this was the ultimate betrayal. Khal was not a savior. He was a legend of sin, the bogeyman that tech priests warned their acolytes about. He was the arch-heretic who believed his own intellect superior to the divine machine spirit. The Primaris Marines were not a gift. They were an abomination. A thing of flesh and steel crafted by a man's hubris, not by the Omnissiah's holy design. But the priests of Mars were silenced. They could not declare their holy war of extermination, their anathema against Khal, because the heretic was standing at the right hand of the Emperor's regent. Guilliman, in his cold, secular logic, had bound the future of the Imperium to a technological devil. He had made a pact with a man who represented the very sins of the Dark Age, the arrogant belief in progress that had nearly destroyed mankind once before. He had forced the entire Adeptus Mechanicus to kneel, to accept the work of their greatest living enemy as their new salvation. The alliance was not one of hope, but of coercion, a quiet schism that placed the Imperium's technological soul in the hands of its greatest heretic. Armed with the two greatest heresies of the 42nd millennium Xenos sorcery and the tech blasphemy of the Primaris Marines, Roboute Guilliman launched his counterattack. They called it the Indomitus Crusade. A fleet of unimaginable power led by the returned Primarch himself, designed to pierce the wall of darkness that was the Great Rift, and bring the Emperor's light back to the lost worlds of Imperium Nihilus. But this was not a crusade of faith. It was a crusade of ideology. It was the armed enforcement of Roboute Guilliman's personal secular truth. The Primarch did not just bring war, he brought reform. As his fleets liberated worlds, Guilliman did not pause to kneel at the restored cathedrals. He did not lead the populations in prayers of thanks to the God Emperor. Instead, he marched into the planetary governors' palaces and the administratum archives. He was the administrator demigod, and he found the bureaucracy of the Imperium to be as much an enemy as the hordes of chaos. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had run on a decaying Baroque and incomprehensibly complex system of faith, nepotism, and tradition. It was a Gothic nightmare of overlapping authorities of tithes centuries late of organizations whose original purpose was long forgotten. Guilliman looked upon this sacred tradition and saw only inefficiency. With the cold, detached hand of a master logician, he began to dismantle it. He rewrote tithe grades. He dissolved ancient councils. He summarily executed inefficient governors and replaced them with men of his own choosing, men who valued logistics over prayer, men who could read a supply ledger, not just a book of saints. He was not restoring the Imperium, he was remaking it. He was purging 10,000 years of established sacred government in the name of efficiency. This was his imperial truth made manifest. The crusade was not just fighting the enemy without, it was a purge of the sickness within. And that sickness, to Guilliman's secular mind, was the very faith that had held the Imperium together. The Indomitus Crusade was a declaration of war on tradition. Each world it saved was forced to conform to Guilliman's new logical standard. The Ministorum priests who greeted his fleets expecting a savior were pushed aside. The Sisters of Battle who had fought and died for the divinity of the Emperor were looked upon by the Primarch with cold suspicion. The Inquisitors who questioned his methods were told in no uncertain terms that their authority now stemmed from him, the Lord Commander, not from some ancient abstract mandate. This is the resurrection of Imperium Secundus. It is no longer a breakaway empire of 500 worlds hidden behind a storm. It is a new ideological empire broadcast across the entire galaxy, enforced by the guns of the most powerful fleet ever assembled. Guilliman was no longer pretending to be a loyal son. He was the master. He was doing exactly what his pride had led him to do. 10 millennia ago, he was building his own imperium, one based on his logic, his principles, his organization. He was creating a new order whether the rest of the Imperium wanted it or not. He was imposing his rational will upon a galaxy that had survived only through irrational screaming fanaticism. And in this he was proving that his original heresy had never died. He still believed with all his soul that he knew better than everyone. Even perhaps better than the rotting god upon the golden throne. The greatest strength of the Ultramarines has always been their unity. Their Geneseed, the most stable and prolific, spawned hundreds of Successor Chapters. They are the Unforgiven Chapter's antithesis. Where the Dark Angels are a constellation of isolated paranoid secrets, the Sons of Guilliman are a brotherhood. They are the Imperium Calum, a network of worlds and chapters bound by the Codex, by shared tradition, and by loyalty to Macraga. Guilliman, in his arrogant crusade of reason, made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed this brotherhood was loyal to him. He was wrong. It was loyal to the tradition he had created. And now the Creator had returned to declare his own creation obsolete. His gifts, the tech heresy of Belisarius Cawl, the new Primaris Marines, were not met with universal celebration. To the Central Ultramarines chapter awed by the return of their father, it was a miracle. But to the hundreds of long-lost cousins, the Successor Chapters who had bled and died for 10,000 years, it was an insult. We look to the Mortifactors, a chapter born of Guilliman's seed yet utterly alien to his secular ideals. Theirs is not a world of shining marble. They inhabit the grim, feudal world of Posel. They do not revere the Codex as a book of strategy. They revere their ancestors. They are obsessed with death ritual and cannibalistic rites of remembrance. They are the darkness at the edge of Ultramar's light. When the Primaris Marines arrived, the Mortifactors did not see salvation. They saw defilement. They saw warriors who had not endured the long millennia. They saw manufactured soldiers created in a tube by a heretic who had no ancestors to venerate. They saw a dilution of their sacred bloodline. To them, accepting a Primaris Marine was to spit on the graves of their forefathers. This was the quiet refusal. Throughout the scattered domains of Guilliman's sons, a shadow war of ideology began. The Primarch, in his infinite logic, had decreed that all chapters must accept these new warriors, that all must learn to replenish their ranks with this new better stock. That veteran Astartes heroes of 1,000 wars must submit to the dangerous, often fatal surgery known as the Rubicon Primaris to be upgraded. Many refused. The Mortifactors, the scythes of the Emperor rebuilt from near extinction, the iron-willed praetors of Orpheus. Proud conservative chapters who had held the line for millennia looked at their returned genetic father and saw not a savior, but a revisionist. A radical? They saw his new warriors as a genetic contamination. They saw his new efficient Imperium as a rejection of the faith that had sustained them. The Primarch was asking them to abandon their very identity, their culture, their traditions, all in the name of his cold, logical progress. The crack in the blue armor had finally appeared. The vaunted loyalty of the Ultramarines, the bedrock upon which their sub-empire was built, was fracturing. A quiet schism was brewing, a choice forced upon every chapter master. Do you obey the sacred traditions you have followed for 10,000 years, or do you obey the man who wrote those traditions, who has now returned to declare them, and by extension you, inadequate? Guilliman's greatest heresy, the sin of Imperium Secundus, was his belief that he had the right to forge a new Imperium. Now his sons were faced with the same terrible choice, to follow their Primarch into a future of rational heresy, or to defy him in the name of the very ideals he himself had taught them. The Brotherhood was broken. Guilliman's new rational Imperium was not being built in a vacuum. While he waged his war of ideology against his own Successor Chapters, the true ancient powers of the Imperium watched from the shadows, and they did not see a savior. They saw a threat. We speak of the holy ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition. They are the ultimate arbiters of loyalty. They are the immune system of the Imperium, a decentralized, paranoid, and all-powerful network of agents who answer to no one but their own conscience and the abstract authority of the Emperor. and from the moment Guilliman awoke he became their single greatest target. Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus, men and women who had spent centuries burning entire worlds for a fraction of Guilliman's sins, now shadowed his every move. They were the hidden eyes in his enlightened court. They recorded everything. They saw the resurrection. They saw the alliance and unforgivable pact with the Inari Xenos witch and her alien god. This alone was a death sentence. They heard his words. They heard the Primarch, the Regent of Terror, openly deny the divinity of the Emperor. They heard him call the Imperial Creed a superstition and a mistake. This was not just heresy, it was the arch-heresy, the very root of all spiritual sickness. They saw his actions. They saw him elevate the heretic Karl, a monster of forbidden science, to a position of ultimate power. They saw him dismantle the authority of the ecclesiarchy, the very institution that held the line against damnation. To the Inquisition, Roboute Guilliman was not a returning hero. He was a secular dictator, a Xenos-compromised radical, an atheist blasphemer who was in his arrogant quest for reason, undoing the very spiritual protections that held the tides of chaos at bay. And they were not alone. Where the Inquisition was the shadow, the Adepta Sororitas were the flame, the Sisters of Battle, the Daughters of the Emperor. They are the militant arm of the ecclesiarchy warriors whose faith is so pure it can manifest as miracles. Their bolters are extensions of their prayer. Their armor is a vessel of their devotion. They live and die for one singular truth: the Emperor is God. And their new Lord Commander told them they were wrong. This was a schism of the soul. The Sisters of Battle were now forced to fight in the armies of a man they privately, secretly believed to be the ultimate blasphemer. They fought alongside his Ultramarines, but there was no comradeship. There was only the icy chill of suspicion. The sisters watched the Astartes for signs of their father's rationalist poison. The Ultramarines watched the sisters, seeing them as symbols of the superstitious, inefficient old order their Primarch had come to cleanse. This is the new imperial reality. A silent, venomous Cold War waged not between agencies, but between the very pillars of imperial power. It has not yet erupted into open conflict, for to challenge Guilliman openly is to start a second Horus heresy. But the war has begun. It is fought in sabotage. It is the inquisitorial agent who accidentally misfiles a critical supply request for the Indomitus Crusade. It is the Battle Sister Convent that, under the divine guidance of a fiery canoness, declares a war of faith on a forge world, unaware that it was a vital resupply depot for the Ultramarines. It is the quiet backroom deals. It is the anonymous assassination attempts on Guilliman's key reformers, blamed on traitors or cultists. The Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy are now united in a shadow pact against the Primarch. They are waiting. They are building their case. They are gathering allies among the conservative Space Marine chapters and the suspicious priests of Mars. A civil war is coming, not of legion against legion, but of faith against reason. And the Ultramarines, in their resurrected rational and heretical glory, stand squarely at the epicenter of the coming storm. This grand ideological hypocrisy, the rigid worship of a book that the author himself was now willing to abandon, was not an abstract concept. It had a human face. It had a name etched in both shame and glory: Uriel Ventris, captain of the 4th Company. His story is the story of the Ultramarines in microcosm. He was, for a time, the perfect son, a believer in the Codex Astartes so devout that he could quote its passages by heart. And he was sent to Tarsus Ultra to fight the Tyranids. There he faced the same test as the scythes of the Emperor. The hive mind had not read his book. The strategies laid out by Guilliman 10,000 years prior were failing. The planet was on the verge of being consumed. Ventris was trapped between his sacred oath to the Codex and his sacred duty to protect the Imperium. He could follow the book and die a failure, or he could break the book and win. Ventris committed the ultimate Ultramarine sin. He adapted. He abandoned the prescribed tactics. He forged an unorthodox alliance with his estranged cousins, the death-obsessed Mortifactors. He employed strategies of desperation, of innovation, of pragmatism. And in doing so, he achieved the impossible. He repelled the swarm. He saved Tarsus Ultra. His reward for this victory was not celebration. It was judgment. He was brought back to Macragge in chains. He was stripped of his rank. His own brothers, including Marnius Calgar, the man who had himself defied the High Lords at Damnos, condemned him. He was a heretic, not for falling to chaos, but for daring to innovate, for proving publicly that the Codex Astartes was not perfect. For this sin of adaptation he was banished, cast out, and sent on a death oath into the Eye of Terror. His journey into the heart of chaos was a crucible. In that realm of pure madness, the Codex was not just useless, it was a liability. It was a rule book for a game that reality itself had abandoned. To survive, Ventress had to shed every last shred of his ultramarine dogma. He had to fight alongside renegades. He had to bargain with the lost and the damned. He had to navigate the iron hell of the traitor legions, becoming a creature of pure, desperate pragmatism. He became the very thing the Ultramarines despised, a survivor unbound by rules. And then he returned. He did the impossible. He found his way back to Ultramar, a man tainted by the warp, expecting only a final execution. But he returned to a new Imperium. He returned to find his Praemarch Roboute Guilliman standing alive and whole in the halls that had condemned him. And in that moment the ultimate hypocrisy was laid bare. Guilliman the author looked at Ventress the innovator, and he did not see a heretic. He saw a mirror. He saw the very quality he himself was now forcing upon the Imperium, the will to adapt. Ventress was not executed. He was pardoned. He was reinstated. And in the final crowning act of this ideological reversal, Uriel Ventress, the man exiled for breaking the Codex, was deemed worthy of the highest honor. He crossed the Rubicon. He was remade as a Primaris Marine. This is the silent admission. For 100 centuries, the Ultramarines were too proud to admit their holy book was flawed. They punished a hero for the sin of being right. But now, with the Primarch returned, the entire chapter was being forced to adapt. The forgiveness of Ventress was not mercy. It was a political necessity. It was the arrogant, silent acknowledgement that the old way was dead, and that the only true path forward was the one Ventress had been condemned for taking. The Ultramarines had been living a lie, and it took the return of their father, the greatest heretic of all, to force them to finally admit it. The galaxy is now, for all intents and purposes, two Imperiums. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, is a scar that divides reality. To one side lies Imperium Sanctus, the Holy Imperium. It is the half that still contains terror. And it is the half that Roboute Guilliman now rules with an iron, logical hand. His word is law. His indomitous crusade fleets are its enforcers. It is his testbed for his new, secular, efficient order. On the other side, there is Imperium Nihilus, the empire of nothing. Cut off from the Emperor's light, besieged on all fronts, this vast swathe of humanity is drowning in darkness. It is an empire of isolated holdouts and desperate, forgotten wars. And in this darkness, the only hope is the legend of the returned Primarch. The name Guilliman has become a prayer. The worlds of Nihilus wait for his fleets, for his Primaris Marines. They are not waiting for the Emperor, they are waiting for the Lord Commander. And in this, the final heresy is realized. Roboute Guilliman has achieved what he set out to do 10 millennia ago. He is no longer just a Primarch. He is the sole absolute ruler. His title is not High Lord, it is not First Senator, it is Lord Commander of the Imperium. It is a title of supreme military authority, a title that has not been held with this much power since the Emperor himself walked among men. He is in name and in fact a dictator. He may be a benevolent one, a necessary one, but he is a dictator nonetheless. He has supplanted the authority of the High Lords. He has cowed the ecclesiarchy. He has neutered the Inquisition. He rules by decree. The truth is unavoidable. The Ultramarines, under the leadership of their returned father, are now enforcing the very sin for which they were born. Roboute Guilliman is reshaping the entire galaxy, not in the Emperor's image, but in his own. He is doing precisely what Horus Lupercal attempted to do. The War Master, in his own arrogant pride, believed the Emperor's vision was flawed, and that he could build something better. He sought to tear down the old Imperium and erect his own. He failed, and he fell to chaos. Guilliman, in his cold, rational pride, also believes the Imperium is flawed. And he is succeeding. He is tearing down the old Imperium of faith and tradition, and he is erecting his own, an Imperium of logic, efficiency, and secularism. He is the successful Horus, the rational traitor, and his Ultramarines are no longer just a legion. They are the new architects of a grand galaxy-spanning Imperium Secundus. We have followed the azure thread through 10,000 years of shadowed history. We have stripped away the marble facade and the polished laurels. We have looked into the cold, pragmatic heart of the 13th Legion, and the portrait that emerges is not one of flawless, simple loyalty. It is a complex, disturbing, and deeply heretical masterpiece. The case is closed. The evidence has been presented. Let us for one final time recount the charges, for the heresy of the Ultramarines is not a single act, but a relentless cascading failure of the soul. We have seen the heresy of politics, the original sin, the founding of Imperium Secundus. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, arrogant, and treasonous decision. It was the act of a son who, believing his father dead, did not seek vengeance but instead sought to replace him. He looked upon his father's grand design, judged it a failure, and set about building his own better version. He tasted the purple of supreme command, and he found that it suited him. This act set the precedent for all time that the unity of the Imperium was secondary to the logic of Ultramar. We have seen the heresy of arrogance. This is the sickness that flows in their Geneseed. It is the pride that led Marneus Calgar to defy the High Lords of Terror, to waste a generation of his finest warriors at Damnos, not for the good of the Imperium, but for the reputation of his chapter. It is the fatal dogmatic rigidity that drove the scythes of the Emperor to their own extinction, a chapter that chose to die clutching a rulebook rather than adapt to win. It is the institutional lie of their perfect record, a refusal to acknowledge their own fallen, their own failures, a refusal to admit that their blood, like all blood, can be corrupted. They have built their identity not on strength, but on the denial of weakness, and this is the most fatal pride of all. We have seen the heresy of collaboration, the sin that resurrected their Primarch. In their darkest hour, the Ultramarines did not turn to faith. They did not trust in the Emperor's will. They turned to the Xenos. They made a pact with the alien, the witch, the emissary of a new and unknown god. They spat upon the most sacred law of the Imperium, suffer not the Xenos to live, and invited the enemy into their most sacred shrine. They allowed alien sorcery, the profane power of the warp, to touch the flesh of a Primarch. In that single desperate act, they proved that nothing is sacred to them. Not the law, not the faith, not the purity of their own father, nothing except their own desire to win. And finally, this pact unleashed the ultimate unforgivable sin, the heresy of blasphemy. The resurrected Roboute Guilliman is not a savior. He is an apostate. He is an atheist in a galaxy that is held together, thread by divine faith. He has returned not as a warrior angel, but as a cold, secular administrator. He looks upon the God Emperor of mankind and sees only a failed father on a broken throne. He looks upon the Imperial Creed, the one single unifying force that gives humanity the spiritual strength to resist the whispers of chaos, and he sees only inefficient superstition. This is not a minor theological disagreement. The Imperial Creed is not just a religion. It is the firewall of the human soul. It is the collective psychic scream of a quadrillion faithful that holds the demonic tides at bay. And Roboute Guilliman, in his rational progress, is dousing that fire. He is dismantling the very spiritual defenses of the Imperium because he finds them illogical. He is the man extinguishing the galaxy's only campfire in an endless howling night because he finds the smoke offensive to his reason, his And so we arrive at the true devastating tragedy of the Ultramarines. It is the perfect, exquisite irony of the 42nd millennium. The sons of Guilliman will never fall to chaos. They are not the word-bearers driven mad by dark devotion. They are not the world-eater's slaves to rage. They are too ordered, too controlled, too proud to ever bend their knee to another. No, their damnation is far worse. Their damnation is their loyalty. They are loyal not to the Imperium, as it is, but to a memory. They are loyal to the idea of an Imperium that died 10,000 years ago, the secular rational empire their father dreamed of. They are the sons who have returned to find their ancestral home, crumbling, diseased, and steeped in a faith they despise. And they have decided to save it by burning it to the ground. They are the surgeons who have declared the patient soul to be the sickness. They are here to save the body of the Imperium, its physical borders, its supply lines, its tithes, its administrative efficiency. But to do so, they are willing, even eager, to rip out its soul. They are replacing the irrational, burning, desperate faith that has sustained humanity for millennia with the cold, sterile, and godless logic of the Codex. This leaves us with the final terrible question. Is Roboute Guilliman and are his Ultramarines the last greatest hope for humanity's survival? Are they the Saviours, the prodigal sons returned to set their father's house in order? Or are they the most dangerous, insidious heretics in galactic history? Are they the successful Horus, the rational tyrant, the ultimate traitor who is finally finishing the War Master's work, not with a demon's claw, but with a reformer's pen and a legion of perfected soldiers? In the uncaring, grim darkness of the far future, the only possible answer is the most agonizing one. They are both. They are the saviors of the Imperium's flesh. They are the restorers of its borders, the cleansers of its bureaucracy, the sharpener of its sword. But they are the murderers of its spirit. They are the men who will lead humanity by force into a new, efficient, logical, and godless age. An age so hollowed out, so devoid of the spiritual fire that defined it, that it will be nothing more than a perfectly functioning, soulless corpse. The hidden heresy of the Ultramarines was never the eight-pointed star. It was the inverted omega, the symbol of their own self-contained, arrogant, and terrible perfection. They are the ultimate heretics, not because they turned from the Emperor, but because they believe in their cold, azure hearts that they have finally, truly replaced him.